Tonight, a tangled web of diplomacy, foreign policy, and power as U.S. officials quietly travel to Venezuela. The State Department describing the trip as a welfare visit, focusing on the imprisonment of several U.S. oil executives currently held in Caracas. But some say the objective of the trip has much broader implications.
I'm certain that discussions beyond the hostages are occurring. The discussion about reintegrating Venezuela into world oil markets, particularly as a source for U.S. and European oil demand.
Nicolas Maduro has been pushing for the U.S. to ease oil sanctions established over the leader's rise to power as a socialist dictator and alleged humanitarian crimes against his own people. The visit comes with the U.S. in desperate need of a boost. The war in Ukraine has led to a 50% hike in oil prices, fueling the worst inflation in decades. Last week, the United States Emergency Oil Reserve fell by nearly 7 million barrels to its lowest level since 1989. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. This will be the second U.S. visit to Venezuela this year, after a surprise trip in March that led to the release of 2 American citizens and a promise from Maduro to jumpstart talks with the U.S.-backed opposition party led by Juan Guaido, the U.S. recognized head of state, after rejecting Maduro's 2018 re-election as a sham.
Despite this particular visit being likely about prisoners, or hostages rather, but certainly a lot more to unpack in terms of bringing about some normalization of U.S.-Venezuelan relations.
Is normalization good when you have a leader like Maduro in power?
Yeah, those are fair points. And again, I think it's important to note that isolation hasn't gotten us very far either, right? 2 decades of isolation and persistent sanctions against Venezuela hasn't shaped Venezuela in the direction sort of advantageous to the United States.
The meetings, while supported by some of the Democratic wing in Congress, have also led to bipartisan criticism.
Here we are once again working with dictatorships in a way that doesn't stand up for our proposition of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law.
But the fuel crisis is putting pressure on the Biden administration to reestablish relations with oil-rich countries. Next month, President Biden will head to Saudi Arabia to meet with Arab leaders, including Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, implicated by the White House in the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, among several other human rights abuses. The president responded to criticisms over the trip.
I'm not going to meet with MBS. I'm going to an international meeting. And he's going to be part of it, just like there were people part of the discussion today.
Now, a new age of soul-searching, as the U.S. reopens the table to a list of the formerly condemned, while reserves sink to new lows.
All right, Steve Patterson joins us now. Steve, as you mentioned, the U.S. government insists their intentions in traveling are for welfare reasons. That's their quote. But has there been any recent indication the U.S. is looking to change the way they approach Venezuela moving forward?
Tom, I spoke to experts. They say the broad strategy of trying to completely cut off Venezuela simply doesn't work. So no doubt part of all this is trying to bring them back into some level of conversation. If that does happen, and the result is that oil is freed up from the region, it will take some time to have an impact on the international marketplace. So the risk of all this consideration has to be closely weighed against any diplomatic backlash it could cause. It really, really is a delicate